What if I told you that the United Kingdom, the very empire that once ruled over India, is now watching its own biggest companies fall into Indian hands? Jaguar, Tetley Tea, Hamleys, Asda, even British Steel. These aren't just brands, they're part of Britain's national identity. And yet, one by one, they've been bought up by Indian giants. From the tea in your morning cup, to the luxury cars on British roads, to the supermarkets that feed millions, Indian corporations now own more of Britain than most people realize. This isn't conquest with soldiers and ships. This is takeover with cash, strategy, and silent power. And here's the shocking truth. Britain's economy is being reshaped right under its nose. Historical irony set up. To understand how shocking this really is, we need to take a step back. In the 1700s, the British East India Company wasn't just a trading firm, it was an empire in itself. It controlled ports, armies, and most importantly, the wealth of India. Britain extracted raw materials like cotton, tea, and spices, shipped them back to London, and sold them at massive profit. India was the colony. Britain was the economic master. Fast forward to today, and the roles are reversing. In the 21st century, it's Indian corporations buying into Britain. The empire that once drained India's wealth is now relying on Indian capital to keep some of its most iconic companies alive. The irony is impossible to ignore. The Indian corporate giants leading the charge, so who exactly is behind this wave of takeovers? At the very top stands the Tata Group, a conglomerate so vast it touches cars, steel, tea, hotels, and IT services. Tata is the crown jewel of Indian business abroad. Then there's the Hinduja Group, an empire rooted in finance, media, energy, and logistics, with deep roots inside London's financial district. Reliance Industries, led by Mukesh Ambani, has already disrupted India's telecoms and retail, and now it's expanding into the UK, with moves in retail chains and green energy. And finally, the invisible giants, Infosys, Wipro, and Tata Consultancy Services, TCS. These firms may not have storefronts in London, but they control the IT backbone of UK banks, telecoms, and even parts of the government. These companies are aggressive because they can afford to be. They've grown rich on India's rising middle class, global outsourcing, and billions in annual revenues. Now, they're shopping abroad for prestige, influence, and access to Western markets. But how exactly did they take over British companies? Let's break it down industry by industry. Luxury cars, Jaguar and Land Rover. One of the most shocking examples sits on British roads every single day, Jaguar and Land Rover. Once the pride of British engineering, Jaguar Land Rover was collapsing by the late 2000s. Sales were falling, debts were piling up, and the brand looked doomed. That's when the Indian conglomerate Tata Group stepped in, buying JLR in 2008 for $2.3 billion. At the time, British newspapers sneered at the deal. How could an Indian company, known mainly for steel and tea, possibly run a luxury car brand? But within just a few years, Tata proved everyone wrong. They invested billions into new models, opened up fresh global markets, and turned JLR into a profitable powerhouse. The most remarkable part? Tata didn't strip JLR for parts or ship jobs overseas. Instead, they kept British factories running and protected thousands of UK workers. Still, the irony remains. A company once seen as the pinnacle of British craftsmanship is now owned outright by an Indian conglomerate. Tea and everyday life, Tetley Tea, and it's not just luxury cars. The most ordinary part of British culture, tea, also tells the story of India's economic rise. For centuries, tea symbolized Britain. But the tea trade was built on plantations in India, introduced during colonial rule. So here's the twist. In the year 2000, the Tata Group bought Tetley Tea, one of the UK's largest and oldest tea brands. Think about the symbolism here. Every morning, millions of Brits pour themselves a hot cup of Tetley. They think of it as a national ritual, part of their culture. But the profits? They're flowing directly into the hands of an Indian conglomerate. The irony is so sharp it almost feels scripted. The land once forced to grow tea for the empire now owns the very brand that defines Britain's tea culture. Or as one critic put it, when Brits drink their morning tea, they're sipping profits straight into Indian corporate accounts. Retail shock, Hamleys and Asda. If luxury cars and tea were symbolic takeovers, retail was an even bigger shock. Take Hamleys, the world's oldest and most famous toy shop. Founded in London in 1760. For centuries, Hamleys was the magical heart of British childhood, the place families visited at Christmas, a symbol of tradition and nostalgia. But in 2019, it was sold to Reliance Industries, India's largest company. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. An Indian corporation now owned the crown jewel of British childhood memories. From teddy bears to model trains, the profits from Britain's most iconic toy shop were now flowing straight back to Mumbai. And then came Asda, the UK's third largest supermarket chain, with stores in nearly every town. In 2020, Asda was acquired by the Issa brothers, self-made British Indian billionaires, with financial backing from TDR Capital. These are not faceless financiers. They are Indian-origin businessmen reshaping how Britain eats, shops, and lives. When you step into Asda to buy groceries, when you take your kids to Hamleys at Christmas, you are participating in an economy increasingly controlled by Indian capital. Everyday life in Britain is now quietly funded by Indian money. Steel and heavy industry, British Steel and Chorus. But perhaps the most dramatic reversal came in steel, the very backbone of Britain's industrial revolution. In 2007, the Tata Group acquired Chorus Steel, once one of Europe's biggest steelmakers, in a deal worth over $12 billion. This was no ordinary purchase. Chorus was the heir to the British steel industry, which had powered ships, trains, and factories for over a century. By the 2000s, though, British steel was collapsing under global competition. Tata stepped in, and while the acquisition sparked controversies, including job losses, restructuring, and political backlash, it also meant survival. Without Tata's intervention, Chorus would likely have gone under completely, and here's the irony that can't be overstated. The empire that once extracted raw materials from India to feed its own steel mills now depends on an Indian conglomerate to keep what's left of its steel industry alive. Britain's industrial pride rests in the hands of Indian owners. Invisible takeover. Tech and outsourcing. Not every takeover is visible on the high street. Some of the most powerful Indian acquisitions can't be seen at all. Companies like Infosys, Wipro, and Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, dominate the world of outsourcing and IT services. In the UK, they control the back-end systems that keep major banks running, telecom networks online, insurance companies functioning, and even parts of government administration working smoothly. This is the invisible takeover. You won't see an Infosys logo on the corner of Oxford Street. You won't find a Wipro supermarket in Birmingham. But behind the scenes, Indian firms are writing the code, managing the servers, and processing the transactions that make Britain's modern economy possible. Every time you swipe your debit card, book a train ticket, or make a phone call, there's a chance that Indian engineers and Indian-owned companies are running the systems in the background. Billions of pounds flow out of London each year into Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Mumbai, a quiet transfer of wealth that most people never notice. Finance, energy, and billionaire families, and then there's the world of finance and energy, where Indian money is not just participating, but dominating. The Hinduja family, long established in London, control a sprawling empire across finance, automotive, energy, and media. They are consistently ranked among the UK's richest families, with billions in assets and political influence. Then there's Lakshmi Mittal, the steel magnate who once held the title of the richest man in Britain. His company, ArcelorMittal, became the world's largest steel producer, with operations stretching across Europe, including in the UK. Indian origin wealth is now woven deep into the fabric of London's financial district. Hedge funds, private banks, and investment firms are heavily influenced by Indian billionaires and diaspora investors. Britain, the financial capital of Europe, is increasingly dependent on Indian money to keep its financial engine running. What was once a one-way flow of wealth during the colonial era has been flipped on its head. Today, it is Britain that leans on Indian capital, Indian conglomerates, and Indian billionaires to sustain its biggest industries. Why is this happening? So how did it come to this? Why are Indian companies suddenly buying up the United Kingdom's biggest names? The answer begins with the decline of British industry. Since the 1980s, manufacturing in the UK has shrunk dramatically. Shipbuilding collapsed, steel fell into crisis, and many once proud brands were left struggling in the global marketplace. Then came globalization. Cheap imports from Asia and intense international competition left UK firms vulnerable. Many were cash poor, debt heavy, and desperate for outside buyers. Indian corporations, with their rising wealth and global ambitions, saw an opening. India, meanwhile, has been experiencing a domestic boom. A massive middle class, record-breaking consumer demand, and decades of growth left Indian conglomerates with billions in reserves. That cash didn't just sit idle, it was used to buy international prestige. And there's one more reason: Britain's openness to foreign capital. Unlike countries that protect their strategic industries, the UK operates a free market approach. That means anyone with enough money, whether from India, the Middle East, or America, can buy a British company outright. In short, Britain put up the for sale sign, and India walked in with the cash. Cultural and political impact. But what does all this mean beyond economics? The cultural and political impact is huge. For many in Britain, it's a matter of pride. Jaguar, Tetley, Hamleys, these aren't just companies, they're symbols of British identity. And yet, for others, it's simple survival. As one observer put it, better Indian ownership than bankruptcy. There's also the symbolism of reversal. For centuries, Britain extracted wealth from India. Today, it's Indian corporations extracting profits from Britain. The narrative of empire has been turned upside down. This shift hasn't gone unnoticed in politics. Some argue that Britain should protect its strategic assets, industries like steel, energy, and retail. But others say the UK simply can't afford to be picky. In a global economy, if you block Indian investment, someone else, maybe from China or the Gulf, will step in. And then there's the matter of soft power. When Tata owns Jaguar, when Reliance owns Hamleys, when Infosys runs government IT systems, Indian companies don't just gain money. They gain prestige. They gain influence. They gain a seat at Europe's economic table through Britain itself. The future, what's next? So where does this all go from here? If current trends continue, Indian investment in the UK will only accelerate. Green energy is one major frontier, with companies like Reliance and Adani pouring billions into renewables. Pharmaceuticals are another. Firms like Sun Pharma and Dr. Reddy's are already making waves in global medicine and could expand further into the UK. And then there's technology and finance. London is one of the world's biggest fintech hubs, with India producing some of the world's best engineers and tech entrepreneurs. Indian firms are perfectly positioned to dominate London's startup and fintech ecosystem in the years ahead. Some analysts even predict that within the next 10 to 20 years, half of Britain's consumer-facing brands could be under Indian ownership or heavily influenced by Indian capital. If that happens, Britain won't just trade with India, it will. Live on Indian-owned products, powered by Indian-owned systems. And so we return to the great irony of history. The United Kingdom, once the empire that ruled India, that reshaped its economy, that controlled its resources, now finds itself bought out, piece by piece, by Indian giants. Not with armies, not with warships, but with boardroom deals, billion-dollar checks, and corporate strategy. In other words, the empire strikes back. But this time, it's not conquest. It's capitalism. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Is this simply smart business in a globalized world? Or is it the slow, quiet rewriting of history?